and it's been about 6 months since we had any conversations about VMware. So I'm wondering what's on your mind today.
Uh, there's been a whole breadth of things that have happened. I mean, everything from the new VM world, which has been renamed to VMware Explore. We did that back in August. Just a totally different vibe, a different direction for the organization. A lot of different focuses on how folks can design and build out their environments going forward. Everything from the traditional apps to all the new modern apps that they're taking on. So there's a lot going on in IT, and it's just fun to be part of it.
I think one of the things that I've been seeing and hearing about is some approaches to how people can do cluster design to maximize their performance. And when I was reading about it, it was kind of like, it sounds like it's fair to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a fair amount of systems that have over time become oversubscribed.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And I kind of think of that as it sounds similar to how airlines overbook their flights. So they want to maximize their ticket sales, but to do that, they're counting on somebody either changing plans or getting stuck in traffic. And most of the time that works out okay, but then every once in a while, everybody shows up and now the airline has too many people for the seats available to them. And you've got upset customers and it's going to cost the airline money to make it right. And it feels like that's kind of the situation that some system admins are finding themselves in. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it is. And you know what? I love that analogy because I'm pretty sure many of the folks that are listening have seen those situations, whether they've been bumped from a flight or whether they've sat at the gate and heard that they need to bump people and they're just holding their head down going, oh man, I need to get home. I got to get back to work.
Hoping
So,
somebody raises their hand for the money, right?
well, if you're there for business, you just want to get home or get to where you got to be, right? So,
Oh yeah. Yep.
if you're like my dad and you have absolutely flexible travel plans, you're happy to be bumped, so you get another free flight. But in infrastructure, that we do that all the time. So let me I'll simplify it really quick, right? So the comparison I can make to that airline ticket analogy that you created, WEI gets involved and we size a solution for a customer. They want to run 100 VMs and 60 of them already exist and we can map them. And then we plan for the, 30% growth. So we sell them a solution in, let's say, 2015. And that solution meets all of their requirements. And then all of a sudden, 7 years goes by and it's 2022. And the customer is complaining that, this runs terrible. We have nothing but aggravation. This cluster does not perform the way you promised it. It would. But then when we start to look at it, we're looking and we see 300 or 400 virtual machines when we initially scoped it to run 100 virtual. And all of a sudden we start to see the delta and the normal rate of change that companies go through, right? Even though you build something, you build in a little bit of a buffer, but there's always this growth, right? And companies always go through this additional growth that they want to make sure that they can deliver additional workloads. And they never revisit what the backing hardware that provides those resources to run their workloads. It's just one of those things that we overlook very often.
It's almost like that analogy, they say if you put a frog in a pot of cold water and then gradually turn up the heat, the frog never will jump out of the pot. It'll just cook. And whereas if you plop him into the hot water, he's going to jump out immediately. And it sounds like what you just described is almost the frog in the cold water, where you start out and everything's fine, but then as business grows, the temperature goes up and up and up. And people don't necessarily notice until all of a sudden they can't do their maintenance during the day, or like you said, a single point of failure happens, and suddenly all of their customer-facing systems are not performing, and people are unhappy. So what would be a good way, do you think, to get the conversation started between the system admins who are facing this situation and the business leadership in order to properly fund the infrastructure that they now need?
The admins are the frontline people. they realize when when we're running out of resources. They are the first ones to see it because they'll try to deploy a virtual machine or whatever resource, and they get prompted and say, "Hey, we can't power on this virtual machine." So the admin knows how to go around and work around that issue to get that workload started for the whoever needs it in the organization. But I think one of the things that we're lacking at that point is the admin's conversation up to the leadership that says, "Hey, we used to design this cluster used to provide us with so many resources, so many capabilities, meaning I can run X number of workloads. All of a sudden, we've now crossed that threshold of what we designed it for. And now we can't meet that availability. We can't do maintenance during the day. We can't survive the loss of a piece of hardware and still maintain the performance." A lot of the admins that I see out there just go through and work through the issue and get the virtual machine started. And they're missing that conversation to the upstream leadership that says, "Hey, and I've done this, I've accomplished what I needed to do, but now we're at risk. We can't meet our KPIs that we've defined for what this cluster should deliver for flows."
I think that anybody who manages a budget has found themselves in that kind of a situation. So when it comes time to reevaluate the KPIs, what's a good way to get started on that?
Well, there's a myriad of ways, right? Open dialogue, the perfect harmony in every organization where every administrator can openly talk to leadership and raise their concerns. That would be, perfect, right? Um, but that's not always the case with every interaction with every admin and every staff member that we ever had. But if you have tools that can show that you are subscribed, there are a lot of tools exist that will show you that kind of method. If you have a partner that you work with, like our customers work with WEI, we can do an assessment and really go in and uh, highlight a lot of the shortcomings of any environment. And please, no, shortcomings aren't a negative, right? It's just what happens after running an environment for 5 years. Um, it's we expect so much from our virtual environments uh, that we kind of take a lot of it for granted. So if we had designed it to run 100 VMs and we're running 200 or 300 VMs on that same hardware that we purchased a couple of years ago, well, yeah, we would expect that we might have a little bit of a shortfall in what's available for resources or guaranteed levels of availability.
Well, you might remember that I used to have a farm,
Hmm.
and you have a truck. You get a truck because you know you need to pull this amount of weight, but then you start getting more equipment that needs to be pulled around, or in my case, I was always adding another horse to the herd. So then you, instead of one horse in the horse trailer, you got three horses in the horse trailer. And what that means is that original vehicle that you started out with to pull this weight can't do it anymore. So you've got to upgrade in order to be able to safely get yourself down the road. And it sounds, I love to use those kinds of analogies, but it sounds like that's kind of what the system admins are needing to do, is explain that, the truck we bought was for, we bought a 1-ton truck and now we need a 3-ton because our needs have increased by that much.
You're right, but you know what? I like your first analogy that you brought up, right? The fact about the airlines overselling tickets,
Yeah.
right? When you look at it, right, most average planes in the U.S., we got 27 rows, 3 seats on each side of the aisle. That's what? That's a lot of people, right? 150, 180, whatever, right?
Yeah, at least.
When you sell 300 tickets for that flight, you're going to have a lot of angry customers. Uh, and that kind of goes into what you're saying as well with buying the right equipment to haul the horses around the farm and to the shows and whatnot. If you bought something that could pull it, that if you bought a trailer, that'd be great. But if you bought a Honda Civic to attach to that trailer, you'd probably be really SOL, right?
You'd
When it
be
comes time
lucky to get out
actually
of the
do the deed.
driveway.
But you know what? Maybe that Honda Civic did you right, right? That was good enough to get to and from school, go to the grocery store. Uh, but all of a sudden, you've increased your load, right? And now you need
Right.
that Ford F-150. And 3 years later, when you triple the number of horses, you need that F-350 with the extra towing capacity. Uh, So you're right, but the thing is, we don't really revisit our workloads on-prem, and in the public cloud, people always kind of revisit those workloads because they're always faced with cost. What does it
Yeah.
cost to run that workload, right? And in a public cloud, if you bought a VM that has 2 CPUs versus 16 CPUs, you can see that bill coming in every month, what it costs to run that workload. In
Yep.
the private cloud, when we just build a cluster that can run virtual machines, we don't always get down to that the nickels and dimes because we've already made the investment in the hardware. So we assume that that hardware is just going to run all of our workloads going forward. Well, that's true, but at what cost, right? Do we want to meet the KPIs that it was designed to meet, or are we just trying to transition and save money and just be focused on density rather than what we expect our applications to do for our end users?
Well, and that's when you start talking about, wanting rock star performance on a karaoke budget. You've got to,
Uh,
you were talking about density, but those are the applications where, it's kind of behind the scenes. It's okay if it's out of service for a little bit of time, but that's not going to work for your customer facing applications.
yeah, and the karaoke is the Rockstar karaoke example is actually pretty cool, unless you happen to be in Las Vegas at the House of Blues at Mandalay Bay, because
Oh,
they do karaoke and there's a whole band behind you and they totally pump you up. But then you go home and you go to your local bar and there's a karaoke machine just, spitting out bad music with a little itty bitty speaker, and it just doesn't feel the same. So you can still get the same goal, right? But the end result is very different.
yeah.
Um, so I
And
don't know.
just for the record, I don't sing karaoke.
I don't either.
It's a public service.
Nobody wants to hear me sing Journey.
Oh
All right,
no,
just
me either. Well,
so.
so we've kind of talked a lot about, how people need to optimize. What would be a good way for them to get started on doing that?
All right. Well, look, y'all work with partners, right? And for those of you who work with WEI, you got it easy because we've been doing for the last 8, 9 years, we've been doing optimization assessments. We can come in and help you right size a lot of your virtual machines. All right. That's the first step. Uh, the second step is we can kind of help you uh, get an idea of what you have in place today and what type of workloads you can actually run. So right sizing a virtual machine, maybe it's oversized and that's taking away from your ability to deliver um, more virtual machines or virtual machines that perform as you expect. Uh, but the end game of an optimization assessment is to provide you with the information about what your hardware can provide to you and your organization with regards to workloads. And whether that's a single VM, 10 VMs, 100 VMs. I mean, we do these assessments up to environments that have hundreds of hosts and tens of thousands of virtual machines. There are ways that we can show you that you can improve um, the way that the hardware and its availability and the way your KPIs and your measurements are actually created to run your workloads. The really so the mathematics are easy. The tools to create all these numbers and provide you with all these metrics, those tools and those things are very easy for us to accomplish. What is not easy is for the leadership to see these numbers and take these numbers and make an informed decision about what would be in the best interest of their organization to meet the requirements of the business for those workloads, be it a key performance index, or just be a general level of acceptable performance for their workloads.
What would be a way to kind of help make that conversation a little less difficult? I mean, obviously, whenever you're talking about making investment and asking for budget, the better the business case you have going in, the better your chances. So, is that something that is an expected result out of the optimization assessment?
Oh, absolutely. We'll provide all the information. But if the organization doesn't want to act upon that kind of an optimization assessment and they just want to continue to do things because that's the way we've always done them, that kind of mentality, well, it's great that they have the numbers and we provide them the assessment. but it doesn't really help them change the way the business operates. My whole thing in going through all these efforts is let's improve the way the business operates. Let's give you the tools, the metrics, and the information to make decisions where we can actually meet the business's requirements for our workloads. I mean, if you break it down really simply, you know, let's just take a SQL server that's a reporting server. If I want to run reports and I want to have those reports done in an hour, but today it takes 2 hours to run those same reports, how can I improve that? How can I get the reports to run correctly? If we can provide you with the information so you can make a decision on how to get those reports to run within the hour that you need them, that'd be great, right? That'd be a godsend, right? Because we've given you the information on how you can make it a intelligent choice to meet your business requirements based on the metrics on your infrastructure that you currently, right? The goal is not always to spend more money. Maybe it's just tuning your environment so that way it meets the requirements that you've laid out. It doesn't always mean spending more money, but
Well, that's good
the
news.
well, yeah, but that also means having a conversation with the business. And just because one of the business units might want a SQL server that has 32 CPUs and 84 gigs of RAM, because that's what we used to do in the physical server space. Uh, those change people, those things need to change as people consume newer technologies. But if we can give you the metrics so you can make good decisions as an organization, so you can do right by your company and meet your workloads, to me, that's the more important thing, not specific. We can give you all the information you want, and WEI's job is to provide you that information so you can make good decisions for your organization. We're not here to tell you exactly what to do. We're here to give you guidance and help you make your infrastructure more resilient, more efficient, capable of being maintained during the day so you don't incur these massive projects that must run over the weekend.
Well, and coming off a holiday weekend, that was probably music to a lot of people's ears, right?
Well, I see a lot of folks that do have to do maintenance during the day because their environment cannot tolerate losing let's say you have a cluster of three ESX servers. If they brought down one of those servers, they couldn't meet the workload demand during the business day. So they're forced to actually do all of their work during the weekend hours when it comes to patching and updating. And if you remember my conversation last time, that's an important thing. But
Yeah.
that also means that if they had a hardware failure during the normal course of business outside of a maintenance window, that also means that they won't be able to meet the performance expectations the business has of them,
Right.
right? So it's not just maintenance, it's also what happens when something fails. And Murphy shows up all day long, all the time, and he will fail something for you, whether you like it or not. So what happens when something fails? How do you address that? And what do you want the organization to look like during those situations?
Yeah. Well, I think it all comes down to, planning ahead and making sure that you're as provisioned as appropriately as possible to make sure that all of those boxes get checked and the folks are able to live kind of a reasonable life with not working on the weekends and crazy hours in the night.
But that also means that if they don't have to work weekends, so that means we can also survive the loss of a single piece of hardware during
Right.
the course of a normal business operation, and that's often overlooked. If I have to do weekend maintenance, that means I don't have enough resources to run consistently during the day when something fails. So again, this just goes into cluster design, right? How do I design those clusters to meet the requirements of the business?
Well, that in its own right sounds like an art and a science.
Having the ability to have that conversation with the different leaders who make those decisions about how to make sure we're meeting those requirements from the organization. Look, we can have those conversations all day long, but if we can show you some of the metrics and the tools and let you make your own decision, that'll be great. As long as we give you the information so you can make your own decisions.
So if someone wants to schedule an optimization assessment, how would they go about doing that?
Info@WEI right? So, info, the 4 letters, and of course, our lovely 3-letter domain, wei.com. Shoot an email there. The marketing department pays attention to that, especially around all of these publications and tech talks that we have. Uh, so they'll be on the lookout for some of those requests.
And just put optimization assessment in the subject line, yeah?
Yeah, sure. And then it makes it easy for them to make sure they prioritize your request. I mean, an optimization assessment is pretty easy. You get useful information in a week. You get real information about the historical trends of your environment after 30 days. So standing up an optimization assessment, I recommend everybody do that, especially if you're coming up on a hardware renewal. Trying to replace some of the gear that might be aging in your environment. And again, we talked about that 6 months ago when we were talking about updates and maintaining the environment. But you know, you don't have to be right at that level, but you can be at any point in your life cycle of your data center to just take a look and review what you're providing for the organization from a performance and an availability perspective.
And how often would you recommend that a system admin do one of these assessments? Is that something they should do every year, or maybe 6 months, or what would be a good frequency for that?
Honestly, I think that should be something that's done consistently. The tools to provide those metrics are available. Um, but as far as a formal organizational review, if you're planning to make sure that you're having 6 months worth of hardware available to run additional workloads, if that was the goal of the organization, to make sure I have 6 months worth of resources to run new workloads that I did not plan for, in my opinion, that should be reviewed once a quarter. That way, every quarter that you're looking at it and saying, hey, how are we doing against our forecast and our roadmap for what we can provide the business?
Got it.
And that way, yeah, you're planning for 6 months, but if you only look at it twice a year, I don't think you're seeing the whole picture. You're not seeing the trends. You're not seeing the growth as things go on. And you could overlook something and you could slip up and put yourself at risk.
Gotcha. So it's regular maintenance, regular assessments, and that's going to keep folks from being bumped off their flights, right?
Well, that, and you know what? I mean, how often do you do an oil change, right?
Yep.
Every year, every 10,000 miles in today's modern cars, right? It used to be what, 3 months and 3,000 miles.
Yep.
So we've gotten a lot further along, but it's amazing what happens when somebody doesn't change their oil in 10 years and then wonders why their car exploded on the highway.
Well, Mark, it's always a pleasure to talk with you. I really appreciate you taking some time today to kind of clarify a few things. And just to kind of recap what we talked about, it's a wise idea to do an optimization assessment on your infrastructure on a regular basis, considering even as frequent as quarterly, to make sure that you don't overgrow and oversubscribe the resources that you have, and keep things moving along, minimizing risk and keeping business continuity in the right cadence. And then just reminder again, info@wei.com, and put optimization assessment in the subject line, and you can get yourself scheduled for one.